Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of Art Made Achievable. Today we're going to talk about brushes and an intro to still life. Now, I know that I've shown this a few times on video, and every time I've skipped past it, I haven't mentioned anything about it, and I've just kind of let it be a mystery until now because I didn't want to get into it because this little menu right here is a great way to talk to segue into our discussion about brushes. So the favorites preset is the default tools that you'll get in this little tool belt that you're given by Krita when you right click. This is a right click. And it lets you change your primary and secondary colors. It lets you select from a multitude of different brushes and tools that'll help you in painting or drawing in whatever you need. And also, it saves previous colors that you've been using. Very, very useful. So, if you ever want to get back to the default tools, favorite presets, but I like to keep mine in circle. These are different brushes that have different effects. This is a ink brush. I'm not exactly sure if it's meant to be ink. It seems like it, but it's very blocky, it's thick, it's super solid, it has a tapered end. And depending on how hard you press, your pen tablet, which is what I'm using, and what direction that you approach the line from, it will change the appearance of what you're drawing. This tool, very fuzzy, and you can see it's getting harder and softer based off of how hard I'm pressing on my pen tablet. I'm pretty sure one of these is the default. This is the basic soft tip. This is the basic Gaussian tip. A Gaussian is a type of blur. So this is it's the most basic type of blurry tool. It'll help you blur while also applying color. So it's not just like a blur tool or a blur filter. It will apply color while blurring what's around it, and the color itself is blurry as well. This is the default tip. This is the one I was thinking of. It's it starts out around mid-range. You see this color is noticeably lighter than the color I have selected. So if you want the color that you have selected, you have to press very hard. And if you don't, you'll just get this like mid-tone between what color you have selected and white. It tapers off. It has this sort of gradient towards I wouldn't say white, it's more transparent to it, and it has this very, I don't know how to describe it, but it's maybe whimsical kind of feeling to it. It's very soft and it feels kind of cloudy. So even though it's the default tip, I don't really like to use it much. I like to use it in my painting, but I wouldn't recommend it if you're drawing. I would recommend one of these three. These two are the line art brushes. This one is a little bit thicker and it has more weight to it. It also, I think, tapers off more drastically, and I think it just has this very nice appearance to it. I think it does line art well. Just a little doodle just to it. I think it displays the lines that you're intending to make really well. And this one is a simple, it's basically a line art version of the default brush. It's nice. That's just one of the many tool belts. This section, which is the block section, is one that I very much like and I use a lot in painting rather than drawing and doodling. These are brushes that try to simulate paintbrushes and how not only the brush itself works, but how paint feels when you're painting. So if you're a person who's come from painting digital, I mean, non-digital painting, traditional painting with acrylic or oil paints, this is really helpful because I think it helps you transition from how you're used to working with color and pigment, how you're used to applying um, shadow and tint to an object that you're painting, especially from life, and it helps you think more in terms of digital art while not abandoning every artistic sensibility you've ever learned. Also, even if you've started in digital paint, like I have, it's the effect that these brushes create are just so beautiful, you know? And you don't have to just apply these colors as a shadow or as a simple hue. You can use them to their full effect. What I really mean by this is, like, look at the shape of this brush and how it works, how it moves, and what it looks like when you apply it. It reminds me very much of a ribbon. So that's what I primarily use this brush for, ribbon. I think it works and it uses this purpose well. And I think it really gives that effect so perfectly. Um, this is like just a strict, very solid, blocky brush. That can be useful. This is like a thin-tipped marker, maybe like a Copic marker, if you're used to that kind of traditional art. This is a very thick marker-esque brush. Again, like kind of like the Copic brush, but a lot blockier, and a lot thicker. Those are the, oh, I just want to show this brush off. This brush is very interesting. I think that this texture is such an interesting texture. You can see how the brush is shaped when I paint it on, but these lines that try to mimic the bristles of a paintbrush, they really add a lot to what you're trying to paint. It's super interesting, and I implore you to check it out. These are different types of erasers. I'm not going to get too into these other ones because I just really wanted to get into the circle and block ink. This is important to know because you're probably going to be using the ink brushes a lot if you're going to be doing line art, and we'll go over line art in the next few episodes, so it's important to understand how these brushes work and to get used to them. This is the brush that I love the most. For line art, it's very free-flowing. It has the tapered edge, but it's solid and it's thick, and it demonstrates the lines that I'm trying to use very clearly. This is the ink brush 25, if you're curious. These other ones are really good for fine-tuning details and for different types of line art. They have slightly ovular brushes, shaped brushes. Some of them, if you enjoy that style and you think that's aesthetically pleasing, go ahead and use it. These FX brushes that I don't have the proper colors selected, but they have their own weird kind of texture and shape to them that can simulate sunlight or frost or snow or whatever it is you desire to emulate. This one can be stars, but I've also used it to look like snow and it works well for snow. Here's pixel art for those of you who like that style of art. Smudging, which I can't really demonstrate unless I paint something on, so let's not get into that. And wet. Wet just means wet looking brushes, I guess. And this can mean this style of painting brush or a quote-unquote wet brush. And a wet brush in terms of digital art is a brush that doesn't necessarily apply color, or it very, very faintly does. This is me pressing as hard as possible, so obviously not a hard brush at all, but it's more used for what effect it makes on applied color. it softens the color and it blends. It's a really nice blending tool. So these wet brushes, some of them are really good for blending in a certain shape and texture, like this crazy looking texture. You can use this to blend in this really interesting looking style. And that's what most of these wet brushes will do. Actually, why don't I just go to erasers? I'm so used to selecting the eraser because I got used to doing that before I realized these were here. So that's why it's so helpful to learn about them beforehand, before you get super used to drawing and painting. Um, so one last thing about brushes. Up here, when you're on a brush, when you're on the brush tool, there's this little box next to these color selectors right here. This is the brush menu. Wow, this looks super complex, and it entirely is, and I understand if it looks overwhelming. But up here, you can move back and forth. These are just the brushes that we went over. These are the brushes that are in that little tool belt. No need to worry about it. You can look through them and edit them exactly how you want to. I recommend you do so. Over here, you can see I was testing out brushes before I started this episode. You can select a brush and just try it out. See how it works. Experiment with what you like and what you think looks good, and if you want to edit it a little bit, oh, I like that, and I can just save it like that, and now this is the style of brush I have. Or I can go back to the setting how it was, and ta-da, that it's back. If you change the setting to something that you realize you don't like, you've used this brush a lot, you've closed and reopened the program, you realize, I don't like this brush at all, I want to go back to the way it was, no issue. You can go reload, and now it's back. It's fixed, it's done, no issue. So they make it really easy for you to experiment and try out what you like and what you don't. I've looked through this, I really haven't before, but I looked through these brushes, and they're all textures that you can apply to any brush that you desire. So I have this paintbrush selected. If I use any of these textures, this brush will have all of its presettings, its opacity, the flow, the ratio, the size of the brush will be all applied to whatever texture of brush I choose. It uses this base image and creates this new kind of brush based off of whatever image or texture you choose. It's really interesting, and it creates some very, very interesting looking effects. And you can go to that from predefined after selecting whatever brush you want to override, in a sense. There are many different textures spanning from leaves to sunblots to random weird shapes. Some of them create super interesting effects like this one that really add something special to whatever you're drawing. You can use this for fog. You can use this for foliage. These things can just add this this texture, maybe as a tile. Whatever you feel would look good or interesting, you can apply, and it gives you a lot of freedom. Not only can you choose from this library of preloaded, pre-downloaded textures, you can upload your own. I haven't been able to find any that I really enjoy, but I think in the next few episodes I'm going to look for some and show you, because some of them that I've seen at least are very impressive, to say the least. So I'll choose a leaf one. I'll pick green. And look, now we have some foliage. and a random blue thing. So if I go back to circle, because I have gone back through the tool belt and gone back to this default tip settings, I guess, it has been reset. But I can go back and grab again my interesting texture. And I can erase in this texture as well, which creates a very cool looking texture as well. A very cool looking pattern. There's one more thing about brushes that I wanted to cover today, and it looks like this episode will be a bit shorter than I expected, which is fine. Next week, by the way, if you're curious, I want to actually get into art, into still life, which is going to be super exciting for all of us. But I mentioned before that you can press harder or softer if you have a pen tablet. This isn't possible if you have a mouse. I'm putting down my pen and I'm taking my mouse. This is what it looks like when you draw with the mouse. So you can't really get the same effect if you don't have at least a pen tablet. Some pen tablets aren't going to allow you to get this level of precision because I think I mentioned in my bio of my YouTube channel that the pen tablet that I have, which is a Wacom Intuos Pro, is $200. It's pretty expensive, but you're not going to need to buy a $200 tablet in order to get interesting and good looking results. If I go to my tray and I hover over my Intuos Pro, which is charged, and I can click on my tablet properties, I can set what kind of tip feel and what kind of sensitivity I want on my pen tablet. If I make it really soft, that makes it really sensitive, which means I don't need to press very hard at all for it to get a really dark look to it. But if I make the tip feel very firm, it's going to take more pressure to get it darker. This is me pressing as hard as possible, and it's still not getting really that close to the darkness of my originally selected color. I like mine a little bit softer than the middle. I think that it feels the most natural to myself, but you can select whatever you think is good for you. Most pen tablets, especially Wacom pen tablets, which are the ones that I've used primarily, will have a settings menu similar to this. Maybe not as in depth, but there will definitely be some sort of tip feel, tip pressure setting. And right here, you may have noticed, you can see what kind of pressure your pen tablet and its pen are getting from how you're holding. This is me just resting. This is me putting a very faint amount of pressure. This is me pushing down as hard as I can. So this signals to me that this tip feel is good for me. This is what feels the most natural. I draw traditionally using a pen and paper very lightly, so I'm used to not holding my pen very hard down onto the paper. But if you're a person who likes very dark pencil lines, you may be more used to a very firm, very hard pressure. So you might require something that takes more pressure to get to a maximum pressure. A maximum hold, which it's all about you and what works for you and your preferences. This tip feel concept doesn't apply to most of the erasers in Krita, but it does to some. For example, let me get one of these brushes and just paint a very big circle. Okay, If I go to erasers, you can see this preview image shows very hard, very solid erasing, but this one shows very soft kind of gradient erasing. If I choose this one, you can see it erases in a very soft, very fuzzy way. So you can customize the opacity, the flow, and the gradient of even the erasers in Krita. And in this situation, tip feel and pressure matter as well. You can see that if I hold down very lightly, it won't erase as much as when I hold down very firmly. This is a concept that's really important if you're painting or drawing anything in digital art with a pen tablet, but especially line art. If you're a kind of person who really likes very detailed line art, especially line art with varying degrees of hardness, you're going to want to practice this concept of holding down very lightly and then hard. If you find that you're like me and when trying to draw a line, you get these bumps and lumps, you can go into your settings and change the precision. A very low precision, it will have no guidance, where a higher precision will have some guidance. This brush by default doesn't have much precision, but this one will guide you a little bit more in what you're trying to draw. It also has a much more of a tapering effect. This is the settings and brush that I like to use when I'm doing line art. It's a very, very fine line, and I think the thinness of it is helpful to me. But if you find that it's too thin and that when you make it thick it looks too fuzzy around the edges, experiment. Look through the brushes, find one that sits right with you. Find one that works for your style, and if you find that this one, for example, is shaped in the correct way and has the correct kind of line that you're looking for, but doesn't have that tapering effect that you want, or the shape is a little bit off in its angle, well, you can experiment with the angle, you can give it spikes if you wish, you can add a randomness element to it, you can increase the spacing, which adds spaces between each point in which you draw, or you can take spaces away if you find that you don't like the amount of texture, of circly texture that's within what you're drawing. You can change the quote-unquote mask type. This one is Gaussian, which is a blur, as I mentioned. You can go to default, which takes away that blur effect, but will leave behind something more interesting and more defined looking, especially because you've added all these spikes. So it's like everything with art, it's really up to your personal preference, and it's important to practice and get familiar with the brushes, with tip hardness, with using pressure in what you're drawing. If you're still not able to do digital art, or if you're not comfortable with it, I suggest getting a pencil and pen, or maybe paint and paper, whatever mediums you like to use, and experiment with pressing down hard and soft, and try to use those concepts that you got familiar with traditional art and apply them to digital art, because it's a very helpful method in getting used to the way that digital art feels. That'll wrap it up for this episode on brushes and brush settings. Next week is still lives, and that's going to be probably my favorite episode out of everything. So that one's going to be a good one, probably going to be very long. So that'll compensate for this one's kind of shorter episode. But yeah, thank you.